But in the meantime, this is Mae Brussell. This is broadcast number 593. It is April 18th, 1983. I've been going to what happened a year ago today. I'll briefly mention that. This was the time period of the Falkland War. This was a time when I was analyzing the importance of Admiral Byrd down in Antarctica, the exploration of Antarctica in the early 1938. Earlier, in fact, the Germans were involved with the Falklands, fighting and protecting the Falklands during World War I. I talked about the relationship of the Nazis, the UFO contacts, the space stations, Hitler's possible retreat down there, the warm water bases, the oasis, the ice-free blue and green lakes that Admiral Byrd talked about from Operation High Jump in 1947, and the connections of Argentina to Antarctica and the necessity for them to have the Falklands and the importance of minerals, the use of the Glomar Explorer down there for the sea companies, for Exxon and the Mellons, the Gulf Oil, and the three major oil companies, the conflicts down there for the resources. Very important for a sea lane that Great Britain hold on to the Falklands. And I also talked about Alexander Haig doing that fancy duet back and forth between England and Falkland and being a double agent favoring the Nazis. It was just shortly after that, I believe 2 weeks later, that Alexander Haig was fired quickly from the State Department. Now I want to update some more on my favorite subject, Mr. Fritz Kramer. I mentioned on broadcast 587 and 590 that the moment of truth would maybe be coming around. Congressman Leon Panetta did locate for me one single picture of Mr. Kramer in 1970, February 27th, 1970, getting the Meritorious Civilian Service Award in the Pentagon. The original brochure, or this typed thing, said that he got the Notorious Award, which is better to describe it. If you send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, I will send you a picture. I made a collage of Fritz Kramer as a prisoner in the docket at Dachau, and another picture of him with the number 33 on from a different book. Both of those are profiles, and a copy of the picture that the Pentagon sent to me. You look for yourself and see what you think. You can't absolutely say that Fritz Kramer in the Pentagon was the Kramer in the docket, but there's no way at all that you can rule it out. The nose, the ear shape, the chin, keep in mind one is 45 years old, the other is 69, but there is no way to rule that out. Now, I did something scary today. I'm not usually scared, and I'm pretty fearless. But I did something scary today. I got a hold of the phone number this week of Fritz Kramer, and I called him today. Didn't answer. There's an answering service, but Kevin Coogan, that marvelous researcher from New York, was in Washington, D.C., and located Dr. Kramer. He's at the Institute on Strategic Trade, Incorporated, 499 South Capitol Street in Washington, D.C., and with this organization, there's a triangle is the motif for the organization that he belongs to. Now he resigned from the Pentagon. There's a triangle similar to number 33, or all the occult meanings of the number 33 that he wore at Dachau that many people have noticed. There's a triangle in the middle. There's a missile going up to the top of the triangle, nice phallic symbol in the center. An oil well, which is also phallic, on the left, a dollar up above, the hammer and sickle to the right, and then there's a CR. I don't know what CR means. Maybe you know. I called that number, 484-5033. There's an answering Codaphone machine. I left my name, and maybe they'll call back tomorrow, but maybe they won't. Now, this organization he belongs to now, Institute on Strategic Trade, which is, of course, a Pentagon, CIA, Defense Department front. This organization has as the chairman Lieutenant General Daniel O. Graham, Graham, former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He's got John M. Fisher, president of the American Security Council, which fits in later to what I'll talk about with regards to the John Kennedy assassination and Robert Morris. Dr. Igor S. Glagolev, Glagolev, from the Soviet Union. Dr. Ernest W. Lefevre, Director of the Ethics and Public Policy from Georgetown. That's the fellow that didn't get the cabinet appointment because of his work with Nestle, the Swiss corporation, sending powdered milk to Africans and around the world to depressed third world people. The children were dying, and giving them these powdered milks that they were dying from instead of encouraging them to nurse the mother's milk. He's got Brigadier General Robert C. Richardson of Illinois with him, and they're, one of the people for the Institute that works with them is Elliot Janeway for the economics of the Institute. Dr. William Van Cleve from the University of Southern California, Vice Admiral E.R. Rectinus. So Mr. Fritz Kramer is alive and kicking. Dr. F.G. Fritz Kramer, described on the board of this group as the former plans officer of the Chief of Staff of U.S. Army. Now, I thought I would just call him and say, hey, Fritz, is this you, number 33? Were you in the docket, or is that a different Fritz Kramer? I mean, you might as well get to the point of this thing, right? So I have the address, and I'm going to mail the picture, the collage, to him this week, and if I'm shot this week, you'll know why. Or the car blows up, or if I have a heart attack, or if it looks like a suicide I don't intend to do, I'm going to write to him, and no, you didn't use pussyfooting, using all this airtime guessing. Let's just find out if that's him. I've spent over a year on it, and for every reason it sort of appears that it is Fritz Kramer. Now, in the autobiography of Reinhard Gehlen, he wrote about his life in the service. He mentioned how when the war was over, he was flown to the United States, and in July the 12th, 1946, the war was over May 8th, he was discharged from a prisoner of war status, and formal birth of the Gehlen organization began. Now, Henry Kissinger and Fritz Kramer, German or American or otherwise, were all part of the Gehlen organization, and it began within a month and a half when the war was over, 2 months when the war was over. Reinhard Gehlen was Hitler's chief of intelligence. And they erased his war prisoner status. Now, this Fritz Kramer is in the docket July 16th, 1946, and then he is freed by Germans working with Georgetown University and Senator Joe McCarthy and a legal staff. He and all the other people with him are freed. He was supposed to get 10 years from the docket. The German Kramer, he disappears. So the point is, if the criminal war status of Reinhard Gehlen is erased in July the 12th, 1946, and he starts the Gehlen organization, why couldn't Fritz Kramer's criminal status be erased July 16th, just 4 days later, in 1946, because they end up together in the same place in Germany that Omer Amagau with Henry Kissinger and the people who were later to go on and conduct the whole Cold War, hot war script that they're into right now. Now, a friend and world watcher was up in Palo Alto at Stanford University and got a record from the Deputy Judge Advocate's Office on the war crimes of Fritz Kramer. They were published October 20th, 1947, and it explains what he was charged with. This is from Europe, and on December 4th or 5th at Bad Nauheim, Nauheim, in Germany, it wasn't in Germany, it was outside of Germany, near the Bulge area. The Battle of the Bulge was taking place December 1944, on December 4th and 5th, and there were orders by Brigadier General Fritz Kramer, Chief of Staff of the 6th SS Panzer Army, but these orders had been signed by Sepp Dietrich. They were supposed to be given by Kramer. But then there were copies of other orders written by Fritz Kramer pertaining to the Ardennes Offensive. The Battle of the Bulge is also referred to as the Ardennes Offensive, Ardennes Offensive, on the 16th of December, 1944, to January the 20th, 1945. Now, at that time, the German army took 5,000 to 7,000 Americans as prisoner of war. And there was an accusation that Fritz Kramer signed a warning on what to do with these people that were taken, and in quotes, get rid of any resistance by the civilian population They're to be broken by all means. By all means, of course, means what Klaus Barbie did to civilian population or anybody else. And Fritz Kramer signed these papers so that 5,000 to 7,000 prisoners were taken and 50% were murdered. That's 3,500 Americans approximately, maybe more, but 2,500 to 3,500 Americans were murdered. And this was signed by Fritz Kramer, and that's why he was charged with the war crime. Now, they describe Fritz Kramer, prisoner 33, as being German, age 45, civilian status unknown. The Nazi organization he belonged to was the Waffen SS from September 39 to May 45. Now, those are the exact dates. The September 39 to May 45 are the exact dates that the other Kramer worked with Henry Kissinger in the United States Army from the time that he recruited Kissinger down in the South to go to Europe and be there when the war was over. So they have him belonging to the organization, but except for those particular orders, he isn't identified in any way in the battlefield, and it doesn't say where he was. And July 16, 1946, he's sentenced to 10 years starting that date, but they were all released and out very quickly. And incidentally, the Waffen SS that he belonged to was supposed to be made up of other nationalities than Germans. It was a special group of people from the Soviet Union and the Ukraine fighting with the Nazis, the Waffen SS. So the date he was linked to them, the identical dates, Hitler's Kramer would have been with the American Army. And as I say, he's not visible in the battlefield or anywhere around, so it's still a nip and tuck how two important Fritz Kramers are in the same place, the same geographical area, end up with the same people after the war, and are continuously close today. Incidentally, the person who got me that information from the Hoover Library also obtained the complete several thousand pages of the Malmedy Massacre investigation. So my work is lined up for me this week. And these are hearings before a subcommittee on the armed services in the United States Senate on the Malmedy Massacre. These hearings were in 1949, beginning April 18th, which was exactly 39 years ago today, an anniversary of the investigation of the Malmedy Massacre. And who do you think was on the Committee of the Armed Forces? Richard Russell from Georgia, who was appointed by Lyndon Johnson on the Warren Commission to cover up the Nazis involved in the murder of John Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson himself from Texas was on the Armed Services Committee hearing the Malmedy Massacre stories, and as I say, they were all released from those prisons. Lyndon Johnson was a lieutenant commander in the Navy in Pacific Intelligence and was on this committee, and Estes Kefauver, who I believe was murdered, and he worked closely, or Bernard Fensterwald worked with Kefauver. Kefauver later was investigating organized crime and had a premature untimely death. And William Noland from California, who worked closely with the China lobby and Madame Chennault and Chiang Kai-shek and Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon. William Noland was on that committee, and Richard Russell and Lyndon Johnson, three characters that certainly appear later, and they were supposed to be hearing the Malmedy Massacre story. So that is the story on Fritz Kramer. I'll try and reach him by letter or telephone and see if it was the same man. If he says no, maybe we have to accept no, or maybe we have to go further, but I'm taking it to the doorstep, so what more can I do? Last week I talked about Helene vonDamm, who Ronald Reagan wants to put in Vienna as the ambassador to Vienna. I sent out with the tapes, the people that subscribed to the tapes are people who wrote to me for members of the committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I sent out the addresses of these people. I forgot to include on that list Senator Howard Baker. I'm sorry. Add that to your list if you're writing letters, or keep it in mind. I sent out a package. If you want it, I spent $200 in printing a 15-page package to every member of the Senate committee. I sent them certified to make sure they got them. I sent them to members of Congress and to the news media, the London Observer, the London Times, a package on Helene vonDamm. and her background and my concern about William Clark and Otto von Bolschwing and Helene vonDamm and the way their career meshed together. And I enclosed in that package another collage I did, a picture of Samuel Cummings in London, the man who supplies the weapons for terror all over the world, with the article mentioning Frank Turpel and George Corcola, that he supplied their weapons. And of course, Frank Turpel worked at Stanford Technology with TCI, the corporation Helene vonDamm had been involved with in Sacramento. And then I sent a copy of an article. Senator Tower's wife takes oath as new director of museum services. Lilla Burt Cummings Tower. Senator Tower's wife is the sister of Samuel Cummings, who supplies Wilson, Turpel, Corcola, Idi Amin, Gaddafi, and the terrorists, Carlos, and anybody else who wants weapons all over the world. He's from the CIA from Philadelphia, and his wife got a cabinet position, $50,000 a year by Ronald Reagan. And then down below, I sent a copy, Reagan to attend a Tower fundraiser. Senator Tower wants to run for the Senate in 1984, and he's having parties already. And going down to the party this month is going to be Ronald Reagan, Howard Baker of Tennessee, Richard Lugar of Indiana, and Charles Percy of Illinois. Now, and Barry Goldwater of Arizona. Now, these three, Baker, Lugar, and Percy, are all on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, voting on vonDamm as ambassador. So you have a cabal there of three people already traveling with Ronald Reagan and with Senator Tower. And Tower's brother-in-law is supplying the people that I'm writing to them about. So it's a little hard for them to separate themselves. And so they don't have a little confusion. I wrote a personal letter to a lot of these people. And one I said, "Dear Senator Baker, it is difficult to ask you to be impartial regarding the appointment of Helene vonDamm as ambassador to Vienna. I have a full copy of your correspondence and report with CIA Director William Colby, July 1974. This illustrates beyond a doubt the level of cover-up of the Senate Watergate Committee." He was on that committee. "And since then, we learned of the Colby-Nugan-Hand CIA mafia connections. There have been at least 14 deaths directly related to that scandal. In the summer of 1974, I tried to expose in an article in The Realist that the Senate Select Committee was part of the cover-up. In addition, Albert Osborne, a double intelligence officer for British and U.S. intelligence, had headquarters in your state in Tennessee, as well as in Montego Bay and Jamaica and other places. Enclosed are these articles. I called attention to them and asked him if he was capable of voting once against the Odessa Cold War network, that I didn't expect too much of him, but I wanted him to know what I was writing to him about, not out of a position of innocence, but that he is part of the problem. And then I sent the pages of my reason for concern, and I mentioned the arrest of Klaus Barbie and how it showed that the CIA has been working with the narcotics dealers, the Nazis, the death squads connected to the Vatican, the Italian P2, and I listed the various scandals and defined the Odessa, which I did on the program for you last week and at other times. And I also gave a rundown of Reinhard Galen's experiences and years, and Otto von Bolschwing and Helene vonDamm, and enclosed the chronology of these various people, how their lives cross, their California connections, their Bolivia connections, their Vienna connections, and so forth. And I sent a package to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In the newspaper today, there was a story, kin of Reagan aides get plum jobs. Now, they not only get plum jobs, but the very people I'm talking about are in the places that I'm talking about that are important. The U.S. Information Agency with Mr. Zwick was set up with the former Soviet refugees that came, they weren't czars, that came out of Russia at the time of when the Tsar was thrown out, the Solidaires, the White Russians, the emigres, and working with the Nazi organizations and setting up the Broadcasting and Radio Free Europe and U.S. Information Agency. And over in Europe, Mr. Zwick, Charles Z. Wick, W-I-C-K, I call him Zwick, but it's really Wick. It came out in the story today, William Clark's daughter has been chosen for an important job in Bonn, and I mentioned William Clark having married a woman from Czechoslovakia and being in Vienna when von Bolschwing was there, and his links in California to von Bolschwing and Helene vonDamm. Now he has a daughter in Bonn, Alexander Haig, a daughter, Barbara, who is overseas ready to work for the U.S. Information Agency, getting $25,000 as an agent. Casper Weinberger, his son, getting $50,000 for the U.S. Information Agency. Monica Clark, as I say, in Bonn, and her friend Ann Collins in London. And they place these people strategically in Europe and Bonn with the propaganda machine. These are the children of the major propagandists of our time. And again, strong Vatican connections. The William Clark is Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Alexander Haig is Sovereign Military Order of Malta. They're knighted. Their loyalty is to the Vatican defense team to keep the Roman Church going, to do away with the Reformation and the idea of thinking for yourself, because their logic is that it leads you to liberalism and that can lead you to Marxism. So the children of these agents get the plum jobs to be in a position to continue the parents' work. And Sven Kramer, the son of Fritz Kramer, he was a baby taken to Germany, lived through the war with the mother while the father was gallivanting around, spent his National Security Council, National Security Agency, or whatever, working with Reverend Moon, and again, continuing the legacy of the father. So you're getting generations continuing this kind of work. There was an article this week, Pentecostal let out of Russia. She lands in Vienna. Vienna is where the people escaping, in quotes, from the Soviet Union go, and as I say, they're given large amounts of money to tell us all kinds of stories of how bad the Soviet Union is, but we don't pay $500,000 for somebody to come up here and tell us how bad El Salvador is, or how bad Nicaragua is, or Guatemala. We only do it if they leave Russia. Anybody else is kicked out and thrown back or killed. It's only bad in Russia. There's no huge salary, no assured jobs or housing or TV promotion if you leave a place where you're fighting fascism. It's only if you escape from the communist place. And incidentally, there was a lot of anger in China this week because there was an allegation that Ronald Reagan said that he would rather adopt and take Hunan, the tennis player, he would adopt her himself before he would send her back to China. And the family was simply furious. They said, is that what you have in America? Is that what goes on in this country? You talk about adopting their daughter, and this is the land of freedom. She came over here, was incognito, in touch with the Taiwanese government. What in the heck is going on? And another example of fleeing to Vienna, going to Vienna, and then coming out to California was this fellow, Zbigniew Rybczynski. Can I pronounce that right? Let's spell it Ryb, R-Y-B, says C-Z-Y-N-S-K-I. He won the Academy Award for a short movie. He made a short movie. He wanted to get up and talk about Lech Walesa. He was rambling and incoherent, and they had trouble with him. They ushered him off stage, and he actually was arrested and taken to the police station because he was so incoherent. The guards said he kicked him in the groin and was acting strange, and they thought he was on drugs. He was totally irrational. The sheriffs took him. He didn't have the Academy Award in his hand, and they took him off to the police station. But he wanted to get up there and talk about Lech Walesa. He is living in Vienna. He's a Polish director in exile in Vienna. Vienna is the place where, with the vonDamms and their kind, you go directly out of Poland and out of the Soviet Union into Vienna, and off you are to Hollywood with a great big Academy Award and a little politics. That's okay. Missing got an award for the best script, so I guess Lech Walesa has to get his 2 bits in at the awards to balance it out. But these people can use Vienna to come over, and Helene vonDamm can bring these well-trained people as agents to continue, not to try and make peace, not to try and expose some of the things that are going on that should be exposed. She will be there to bring agents in who will keep instigating and promoting the problems. I mean, you've been reading about Lech Walesa and the labor union there and the problems in Poland. I've never heard so much media talk about labor unions in the United States. the labor unions were shot down. The labor unions are not existing in Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay. I mentioned this before. When do the labor unions get so much attention? The only time they get attention in this country is when people like Jimmy Hoffa and the organized crime syndicate get into the news. But when do laborers get represented, or the truth about working conditions? It's very hard to get the attention of oppressed people in the news of any country except Poland. Well, why is Poland so precious? If the news media people talk about Poland labor unions one night, we should at least write to the Tom Brokaws and these various people on the news and say, well, how about labor unions in Brazil? Or tell us about Haiti. Should we talk about labor unions in Haiti? I was just reading an article on the way the baseballs are made and how there were factories in Puerto Rico until 1974, and then they were moved to Haiti because the wages are 30 cents a day to tie by hand carefully, and I don't know how many you have to make a day. That's a choice salary in Haiti for the strain of stringing up the baseballs for our precious baseball games. They moved it away from Puerto Rico, where they might have had $1 a day, and put it in Haiti, where it's 30 cents a day. Let's distribute it. The imbalance is terrible. Now, there is a magazine I've had references to from time to time and never had the address, called New Times, and I want to mention it to you in case you're interested in subscribing. The address for the subscription is 17-19 Washington Avenue, Tenafly, Tenafly, New Jersey, 07670. It's the EBSCO, EBSCO, capital letters, all that, subscription services. The New Times is a weekly magazine published by the Soviet Union. It comes out of Moscow. And they have a lot of articles on the Vatican, on Roberta Calvi, on Klaus Barbie. They have information, opinions of what's going on, the way Congress is voting, the way the budget's going, the way the Allies feel about Ronald Reagan. And it's good to get a viewpoint from the Soviet Union on how they feel about us. You may suspect how they feel, but get a clear analysis. And they have a lot of good articles on the subjects that I've mentioned. So I started subscribing to that. I've seen and heard about it for a long time, but that is the address if you want it. It's $16.50 a week, and if you can't take it, I'll share what I consider the best of the articles from time to time because I'm reading them. Now, there's so much news flooding out that it's a toss-up every week, of course, what to share with you. But one of the subjects that is close to my mind is the murder of John Kennedy, which took place just 20 years ago this November. And as I mentioned before, instead of waiting until the anniversary of the death of John Kennedy, I thought every week, either 5 minutes or 15 minutes or a half hour this evening, I would discuss new information with you on the murder, because you may say, well, what is new? It's been 20 years since he was killed. The House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the case, and furthermore, there's over 250 books critical of the Warren Report. Well, the way I did my research, and I really should be getting a book out on it, is different than all these other books that have come out, and I've incorporated, of course, material from all those other books, but I'm going to each week share with you this information because there are a tremendous amount of people who subscribe to the tapes or listen to broadcasts who first knew about me because of the work on the John Kennedy assassination. And all the news that I share with you goes back to John Kennedy. If we talk about Klaus Barbie, NBC was talking about John J. McCloy helping him to go to South America. John McCloy was with the Warren Commission. When you read The Belarus Secret, John Loftus's book about the Nazi war criminals, Richard Nixon and Nelson Rockefeller were two of the people that brought the war criminals here. Richard Nixon appointed Gerald Ford to the Warren Commission. He was the leading Republican and made the choice of Gerald Ford on the Warren Commission, and brought these Nazis to the country that had a role in killing John Kennedy. Nelson Rockefeller wrote the checks, the blank checks for George DeMohrenschildt, long before Kennedy was killed. When DeMohrenschildt was traveling and he had been suspected of being a Nazi war criminal, he carried the ID of Nelson Rockefeller, and DeMohrenschildt supplied the housing and the jobs and the contacts for Lee Harvey Oswald. So every current book or almost every current newspaper article that I'm reading intertwines and goes back to Dallas, back and forth from today to Dallas. So what I want to do is discuss some parts of the Dallas story every week. And if you put those all together and send a self-addressed stamped envelope, like many of you do for the sheets that go with the broadcast, you will have the equivalent of a book on the John Kennedy assassination. Before we get into that now, we'll take a 1-minute break, and then we'll get on with a half hour of the John Kennedy assassination. If you have things to contribute, call Lori here at the station, 375-3082. If you can leave off cakes that weekend, if you can bring your spring clean out your closets and boxes, if you can subscribe, that's great. If you can go to the concerts up in Santa Cruz, they're going to have a large one at the Boardwalk. Let me see the date of the Boardwalk concert. I don't have it right in front of me. May the 7th is the sale. Saturday is the sale. And the concert on the Boardwalk, I'll have to look that up. I didn't bring it in. I'll get that for you next week. We'll put that on the air. They had one concert, as I say, this last weekend. I couldn't go. I'm going to try and get up to one of them. But try and go and get into participating. If you want to help sell things, that's fine. Give your time. And as I say, bake or do whatever and help the station, because that would be great. Okay? Everyone should contribute a little bit and get the energy going and help us. That's the thing to do. Side 2 of broadcast number 593. It's April 18th, 1983. Now, a fellow, I don't know him. I know most of the researchers, but I don't know this one. His name is Mark Allen. He brought a lawsuit against the House Select Committee, against the CIA in Washington, D.C., and won it. The article in the Washington Post, April the 8th, says, Judge rejects the CIA bar on Kennedy documents. Remember this judge, because he'll have some mishap too. You got to get these names down, because goodness knows what will happen. His name is U.S. District Court Judge Thomas A. Flannery. I'll file the article under F real fast, because some mishap happens to these people so quickly after they take a position of this kind. Now, it seems that the federal judge has rejected the effort of the Central Intelligence Agency to keep secrets thousands of documents from the House Select Committee's investigation into the murder of John Kennedy. It's 20 years after Kennedy's murder, and the House Select Committee made a little tricky deal. This is Representative Louis Stokes, who was chairman of the committee in 1979, worked with G. Robert Blakey, the chief counsel for the committee, and they cooked up a little deal whereby, according to the Washington Post, they devised a system whereby the material would be locked up for 50 years on the murder of John Kennedy. Now, what kind of material? There's 200,000 pages that the CIA held back, and this judge says they have to release these from freedom of information, that they can't say that it went to Congress, so it's part of the Congressional Committee and can be locked up. The judge said in a 21-page ruling, he dismissed the CIA claim to privacy. He said a large number of the records requested by the Assassination Committee to the CIA were never even reviewed by the committee staff. Now, I have one document from it came from the National Archives a long time ago, mentioning that Lee Harvey Oswald was an agent of the CIA, and I have his CIA number. So you can imagine what kind of information there is if there's 200,000 pages. Mark Allen brought the lawsuit. He's a JFK researcher. He brought it to court. And that is an example of somebody doing something that they should be doing and spreading the information, getting it out to other people. Flannery said this ruling applies to more than 200,000 pages of CIA records that they wanted to keep away of the John Kennedy assassination. Now the FBI is processing more than a total of 300,000 pages on the Kennedy murder. And they said in the newspaper, the Washington Post article, in 1979, the House Committee said it was committed to public disclosure of all the facts, but later it found out that they had arranged to lock them up, and they decided to release all that the public needed to know. Now, people come up and say, didn't the Warren Commission investigate John Kennedy? Didn't the House Select Committee investigate John Kennedy? And my answer always was no. Easy to spell. N-O. Never did. And what did they leave out? They left out the Minsk Nazi organized crime connections to the murder of John Kennedy, and I'll do more with you on why the Nazis were involved in helping to kill John Kennedy. But I want to do one little section tonight on Robert Morris because he's so important. He's still functioning, and as I mentioned on the talk show that preceded this program, we were talking about repressions. Robert Morris is presently chairman of the National Committee to Restore Internal Security. And Kevin Coogan, the same researcher from New York who got me the address and information on Mr. Fritz Kramer, sent me a bio of Morris that's in a new book that he just wrote. And Robert Morris was important because he brought the men from Munich, Germany to Dallas, Texas, who were involved with the military intelligence to kill John Kennedy. And these men, their names have been kept secret for 20 years. I researched them over and over again. And Robert Morris, through the Young Americans for Freedom, it was a newly formed organization put together by E. Howard Hunt of the CIA and William Buckley of the CIA at the time that Kennedy won the nomination. And then in Texas, Robert Morris carried the ball going. He had come from Washington, Texas, to be there to meet the men from Munich, Germany, that were involved with the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Department, and the Munich, Germany connections to the murder of Kennedy. Now, in Morris's book, he's described as Robert Morris has been teaching geopolitics to students. He's the president of the University of Dallas right now and of the University of Plano, wherever the heck that is. During World War II, he was Navy intelligence officer in the Soviet counterintelligence and psychological warfare in the Pacific. That would be with Colonel Charles Willoughby, Mr. Wiedenbach, the Nazi, Kurt Wiedenbach, the head of Douglas MacArthur's team, his intelligence team, and he does work with him later. They line up later together. He was chief counsel to the U.S. Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, the Security Subcommittee. Remember the McCarthy hearings and the terrorism? And he was Republican counsel to the subcommittee of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He writes a weekly column around the world and so forth, and he's a lawyer, a former judge, and as I say, president of the University in Texas, two of them, and he wants to restore the Internal Security Committee. Now that is Robert Morris, and he writes a column in a newspaper in Texas and wants to bring back one more repression that we had during the Cold War. Now, Robert Morris and another Fritz Kramer, not to confuse you, and I don't want to too much, line up later with a series of organizations and Colonel Charles Willoughby that are all violently anti-communist and that work with Lee Harvey Oswald and Marina Oswald. Lee was in Navy intelligence and she was brought in through the Galen organization. There are a list of letters. Somebody called in last week and wanted some of these letters, and I'll give a few that connect. One is the APACL, the Asian People's Anti-Communist League. It was formed in Taiwan by Spaz Rakin, and Spaz Rakin is the gentleman that met Lee Harvey Oswald in New York City when he arrived from the Soviet Union. The ABN is the American Friends, the Anti-Bolshevik Nations, that started in 1960 psychological warfare and political war against the Russians. NTS are Russian emigre organizations for psychological warfare with Radio Liberation, Radio Liberty in Munich. WACCFL is the World Anti-Communist Congress for Freedom and Liberation. They had a meeting in Mexico and to decide what to do in 1958 on how to proceed with the Cold War. Chiang Kai-shek from Taiwan, Syngman Rhee from South Korea, and Diem of South Vietnam were represented in the steering committee. I might say they all turned out to be big losers, if you follow what happened to them. But out of this organization, there was a gentleman, this Fritz, only he spelled C-R-A-M-E-R, Fritz Kramer. And I don't know why. I spoke to somebody, Peter Dale Scott, who wrote this material, and I spoke to somebody else about Kramer. Why the C-A-R-M-E-R? Because this Fritz works with the same organizations that the other Kramer worked with in the Pentagon and with Henry Kissinger and with the military Navy intelligence. But with Peter Dale Scott's book, he spells it with a C, so I still don't know if it was the same one or not. But these organizations, one called the VFF, the Industry Financed this particular group, vigilante group, to ferret out files on German leftists. The VFF was one group, and the American Security Council was another. And these two people, one was merged with the other, and the job was to stop people to seek employment in private industry in the United States and in Germany if they had any kind of leftist linkings. And this goes along with Senator Joe McCarthy and the blacklisting in Hollywood and in Washington with these committees to scare people. They had over 1 million names of subversives. And a Lev Dobriansky, D-O-B-R-I-N-S-K-Y, worked with former Army General Charles Willoughby, McCarthy's top intelligence chief, and they both worked with Robert Morris, the Republican counsel to the subcommittee of the U.S. Senate. So the VFF was run by a particular Fritz Kramer after the war, and I don't know, again, whether it's our Pentagon Kramer or not, but the Pentagon one was working with them simultaneously. The American Security Council and Robert Morris of the Senate were all working together and associated together and interlocked with right-wing organizations such as the Young Americans for Freedom. Now, the YAF, as I say, had a team that were brought from Munich, Germany, directly to Robert Morris, and Richard Vagary, who's very much a spokesman for the far right, who thinks Ronald Reagan is a leftist, who does the mailing for Reverend Moon, who represents Taiwan and so forth. Richard Vagary began his start in the YAF organization formed when the men came over from Munich with Robert Morris, and they all work out of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Robert Morris was part of that activity. Now, when Sylvia Marr wrote her book, she wrote Accessories After the Fact, but she also wrote a book on the subject index of people mentioned in the Warren Commission hearings and the Warren Report because the hearings were not indexed. So she did a subject index in 1966 of the Warren Commission hearings of 26 volumes and broke it down into names and subjects. Sylvia worked at the United Nations for 20 years. She was the one who tried to betray. She did just slam Jim Garrison and tried to accuse him and myself of being crazy. She prided herself of placing Tom Bethel on the staff of Jim Garrison's office when he had arrested Clay Shaw for his role in the conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. She bragged about that, and she actually had placed a spy there, and Clay Shaw had worked with Reinhard Gehlen and the Nazis. Now, she wrote an subject index, and she left out the names of the people that worked with Robert Morris and Young Americans for Freedom in Munich, Germany. Now, I saw Sylvia at the United Nations building, I think 1976, wanted to give her the Torbett document. 1975, she didn't want it. Later, she worked for Mr. Blakey, G. Robert Blakey, and the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and of course their investigation stayed miles away from all the information that was essential to understand what happened in Dallas, Texas, and how the far right wing, the Colonel Willoughbys, and the right-wing group that had worked in Southeast Asia, later working with Lee Harvey Oswald and Marina Oswald, and also had a major part, U.S. military intelligence, in the murder of John Kennedy. Now, Volume 15 of the 26 volumes of Warren Commission hearings mentions some people that I'm going to read their names for, and many of them are not mentioned at all, and 11 of them are used, their names are mentioned, but they're not in the index of the book. Volume 15 has an index of material, but many names are left out, and those names that are mentioned are not called as witnesses. If they are mentioned and called, I'm not including them, but the entire YAF group was left out. Now, the Warren Commission hearings, if you have the volumes, go to the library, volume 18, pages 835 to 898, 63 pages of testimony of a right-wing military intelligence team brought from Munich to the Dallas-Fort Worth to Robert Morris, who's now president of the university, who wants to bring back the internal security group. And I'll give you those names so you get an idea of what Sylvia left out and the important thing that these people should be remembered for. The subject index that she did, she updated. The first book was 1966, but she updated in 1980, and the names were still left out. So you can't say she ran out of time. Therefore, they were excluded for a particular reason. Now, in the testimony of these various witnesses of Jean DeMohrenschildt, she mentioned Howard Hughes, and it was Robert Mayhew from the Hughes organization that hired John Rosselli, Sam Giancana, and the crime syndicate to help kill Kennedy. In the Warren Commission hearings index, Howard Hughes is never mentioned. In Sylvia's index, Hughes is never mentioned. Larry Schmidt, a very important person of the Munich gang, is never mentioned and never called as a witness by the commission. He's mentioned as a right-winger by Sylvia in her index, and that's all. But Volkmar Schmidt, Larry's brother, who worked for General Walker, is never mentioned by the Warren Commission index and not called as a witness, and is not mentioned by Sylvia Marr. Bernard Weissman was the only one of 19 people from the military intelligence brought from Munich or in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, who worked together with the YAF, with the E. Howard Hunt Buckley team and Robert Morris. Bernard Weissman was the only witness called. When he spoke, members of the Warren Commission got up and left the room. It's in the testimony. They got up and walked out of the room. She mentioned him as a right-winger, but they had left the room. Warren Caroll of the CIA, a friend of Jack Ruby's, who wrote Lifeline for Hunt, college degrees from Columbia and various places, not mentioned by the Warren Commission index and not mentioned by Sylvia Marr. Robert Morris, that important right-winger who headed the subcommittee, the Senate subcommittee, and wants now another list of people to scare us with employment and jobs. Robert Morris from Navy intelligence, and remember Lee Harvey Oswald was in Navy intelligence. Robert Morris has a key position here. Morris is not mentioned in the Warren Commission hearings, and he is not mentioned in Sylvia Marr's index. Clyde Moore was not mentioned by the Warren Commission, and he's not mentioned by Sylvia. Frank McGee, not mentioned by the Warren Commission index. Volume 15, they have an index, and not mentioned by Sylvia Marr. Dale Davenport from U.S. Military Intelligence, not mentioned by the Commission index, and not mentioned by Sylvia. Now, I'm mentioning Sylvia because you can expect the Warren Commission to cover up, but this is a private investigator, and you have to know that in this world of espionage and counter-espionage, intelligence and counterintelligence, many of the people writing books are agents. Just as Woodward and Bernstein write a book and don't tell you about Watergate, Sylvia Marr worked as an agent and diverted 20 years away, had plenty of time, as did other people, to mention Dale Davenport, U.S. Military Intelligence, not mentioned. Norman Baker, U.S. Intelligence, all came from Munich, Germany, not mentioned, never called as a witness, not mentioned by Sylvia. Bill Burley, from Germany to Dallas, he's not called as a witness. The Warren Commission mentioned him in the index, but never called as a witness. She cited one document, CE 1811. That's not enough for Bill Burley. Boyda Boyce, B-O-Y-D-A, B-O-Y-C-E, not mentioned by the Commission, not mentioned by Sylvia's index. Art Franzwald, F-R-A-N-Z-W-A-L-D, not mentioned by the Commission and not mentioned by the subject index of Sylvia. Ken Glazebrook, G-L-A-Z-E-B-R-O-O-K, he was mentioned in the index of the Warren Commission, but he was never called as a witness, never called to testify. In their index, he was cited. She never mentions his name. Richard Harsh, H-A-R-S-C-H, never called to testify, mentioned once. She does not have him in her index. Larry Jones, a very important part of the Munich Young Americans for Freedom, because, again, it goes now to Robert Morris, to Richard Vagary. They have continued their policies, William Buckley, E. Howard Hunt, and the gang. Sheila McDonald, as I say, never called to testify, not mentioned. Connie Trammell, very important person. She is mentioned in Volume 14, and in the hearings, hearing number 92, Volume 14. Very important person because she's a link of Jack Ruby to the Republic National Bank, to the CIA, to the Helms family, Lamar Hunt, and not the Helms, Lamar Hunt, Connie Trammell, Jack Ruby, Lamar Hunt, the links of the CIA to the Republic National Bank, to Larry Schmidt, to Volkmar Schmidt, never called as a witness, not at all. And Connie Trammell is a very important person. and James Mosley, not called as a witness and not mentioned in Sylvia's book. So what we had in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I'll read you some of the testimony out of those pages, are some very important people. The YAF was taken over. I'm reading from an article on an organization called CUSA, C-U-S-A, that was in Look magazine a long time ago. The YAF was taken over by military intelligence with specific plans for something to happen in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. And bridging the gap were YAF members from the Southwest, and they covered a whole area of New Orleans and Texas, and they hoped to have 200 to 300 members and have control of the Congress by 1978. Now, Tom Charles Houston, H-U-S-T-O-N, of Watergate fame, who began the COINTEL program under his name, was a member of the YAF out of Indiana, who surfaced with a lot of power. And also Spiro Agnew has his foundation in Indiana, Education for Democracy. He's been very quiet lately. YAF has their material printed in the Cross and Flag, a racist paper, in White Power newspapers, the American Nazi Party, and Liberty Lobby, and so forth. Larry Schmidt, I mentioned his name, was the leader and organizer of this group. He made provisions for them to be in Dallas when Kennedy was killed, working under the YAF banner, and the documentation shows in their various letters how they came to town and went directly to the home of Mr. Robert Morris. Volume 18, page 886 of the Warren Commission hearings. Larry Schmidt writes to Bernard Weissman, over to Germany, my mission in Dallas has been accomplished. We are in. I met with Dr. Robert Morris, president of Defenders of American Liberty, and Clyde Moore, former public relations man for Hunt, a former UPI newspaper, Ken Thompson from the Dallas Morning News. I got immediate backing from Morris, Kubek, that's K-U-B-E-K, Woods, and Ellis. I got immediate backing. This is Larry Schmidt to Bernard Weissman in Munich, Germany. And here is Robert Morris from he's in charge of the Soviet agency, the counterintelligence against the Soviet, Navy intelligence, and with the Senate committee, the internal committee, and he has moved from the Senate and the Republican counsel for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and he's sitting there when Larry Schmidt comes from Munich, Germany, and my mission in Dallas is accomplished. I got immediate backing from Robert Morris. Ken Glazebrook, according to volume 18, page 858, Ken Glazebrook, he wrote, is in Yugoslavia. He's in the Middle East all next month before arriving in Dallas. You will get what Larry got when he arrived, a week-long briefing they were to get. Volume 18, page 851, arrangements have been made to meet the head of the Dallas John Birch Society and General Walker and H.L. Hunt. And I'll do more on Walker in the weeks to come. Volume 18, page 837, Larry Schmidt wrote to Bernard Weissman in Germany, is not a decision whether you can do better financially here or elsewhere, or rewarded here. It's a decision of whether to honor your oath to sacrifice for your country. These were months, just a year prior to Kennedy's murder. Kennedy is scheduled to be in Dallas November 24th. He had that date. Arrangements are very delicate. I have worked with Dale Davenport, the chairman of YAF. If I don't produce the bodies, Dallas is liable to think me a phony and say, forget it. P.S. My brother began working as an aide to General Walker. He's being paid full time. These are directly out of the Warren Commission hearings. Page 18, volume 18, page 846. Frank McGee met military intelligence men from Munich at his home in Dallas in the fall of 1962. McGee, after 4 hours, agreed that the National Indignation Committee and CUSA, C-U-S-A, would merge in the fall of 63, just before JFK was to be murdered. They were to merge. Frank McGee would become president of the merger. Larry Schmidt would be vice president. And in volume 9, page 267, there's a testimony of George DeMohrenschildt, how he attended the Dallas Council of World Affairs. That's DeMohrenschildt, the Nazi suspected as a Nazi war criminal with his blank checks from Nelson Rockefeller. He's the one who got Lee Harvey Oswald his apartments. His job at the printer located him for jobs and housing. DeMohrenschildt testifies in Volume 9 that Mr. McGee was president of the Dallas Council of World Affairs, and Frank McGee is to be president of the Organization of the Men from Munich, Germany, and Military Intelligence, who were going to be there to produce the body when John Kennedy is in Dallas. There's a note of the Young Americans for Freedom, Military Intelligence, in quotes. We met at Ken Thompson's for 4 hours. He's an editorial writer for the Dallas Morning News. We drew up an organization. All officers are to be paid full-time as money permits. Clyde will be paid immediately. We have 3 offices still open. No one in Dallas knows it, but I am reserving them for Bernie Weissman, Mr. James Mosley, when they get to Dallas. Our starting salary will be $100 a week. Volume 18, page 854, Larry Schmidt writes to Munich, Germany in June, and he's to be in Dallas in the area. Bernie Weissman's the one who takes the ad to the newspaper sign about wanted for treason when John Kennedy was accused of treasonous behavior. It had the black border around it, was paid by the Birch Society, and Weissman was brought from Munich, Germany to Dallas to put the ad, and he didn't even know what the organization was formally called. He wrote the address on the cuff of his sleeve, and he was called as a witness simply to tell about the ad that was placed with the black border suggesting Kennedy would be killed. The day he was killed, it had the big black border on it. But they were all brought from Germany, military intelligence, and their correspondence with the top officials of our Senate Internal Committee, with the UPI, with military intelligence, with our Defense Department counterintelligence. It's all in the 26 volumes. It's been kept secret for almost 20 years, and I decided each week we'd share a little bit of it and start getting it out in the open. Volume 18, page 854, Larry Schmidt. To Bernard Weissman in Munich, this is the one June 2nd, 83. I took Larry to my office, the Mutual of New York. Young men like myself are making a mint of money. He saw figures on YAF's political treasury and, of course, $1,000 donations. Recruiting from scratch is tough, especially for the inner circle. By the time you get here, we will already have taken our moves to gain. He says, when you get here, we'll do the rest. Please contact Norman, Bill, Jim, Sheila, and my brother. One by one, we are getting the old group back here. Jones was to arrive from Munich in May, Mosley in June, Baker and you in July, and Sheila in August. And remember, by November, Kennedy had his head blown off. They all had a strategic place, and they were corresponding. Page 20, volume 23, page 701, Richard Marks was the assistant cashier for the Republic National Bank in Dallas. Bernard Weissman, William Burley, November the 12th, 1963, that were to open their accounts at the Republic National Bank, and later that bank was identified in the exposés a few years later, as being the conduit for CIA black money, for the killing money out of the Republic National Bank. And on page 701, volume 23, they're opening their accounts. Schmidt, a friend of Warren Caroll of the CIA, brought Weissman and Burley to Dallas weeks prior to the assassination. Now, Warren Caroll, described in volume 18, page 858, I've got 1 minute, the member of the group that was formed in Munich, Germany, and moved to Dallas. Warren and Larry Schmidt got along beautifully. Warren has a PhD from Columbia. That's where President Eisenhower was president of the university there. 2 masters from Colorado. He's going to law school. He will do the legal work for us. He is the personal writer of H.L. Hunt, the oil millionaire, the richest man in Texas, the arch-conservative. Hunt's son contributed $1,000 to YAF thanks to Warren Caroll. So in this closing minute, let me tell you that the CIA, a man with 2 doctor's degrees, 1 doctor's degree and 2 masters, did the legal work for the men from Munich, Germany. That was the military intelligence team that was planned from June 62 that went directly to the home of Robert Morris, Navy Intelligence, Counterintelligence, Senate Internal Security Committee, who wants to bring back the committee again. Well, that's a little brief resume of some of the information I have on the Kennedy assassination, and we'll do a little more next week. In the meantime, this hour has passed. We could do a few more hours, but it's all over. And I'll pass on the mic and say I'll be back with you next week. This is Mae Brussell at KAZU-FM in Pacific Grove, California.